the Valley of Slow Hours. In a land where time thickens like honey, an elderly time shepherd guides our lambs through misty valleys. When one lamb lingers at a frozen moment, a child's first laugh echoing forever, she must gently untangle it without rushing, teaching listeners the beauty of presence. The mist never quite lifted from the Valley of Slow Hours. It sat thick and wool-soft upon the grass, curling around bent stone paths and leaning fences, coating every leaf and lantern post with the stillness of long-held breath. In that valley, time did not pass so much as unfold, petal by petal, like a camellia resisting the rush of bloom. And in the heart of the valley walked Mother Irwin. Her shawl was a worn thing, woven with silken strands of dawn and dusk, embroidered in patterns only the patient could see, stars falling in slow arcs, moons rocking in cradle curves. She carried a long crook of polished driftwood, strung with silver chimes that whispered to the wind. Around her feet trotted her hour lambs, their fleeces glowing faintly with the hues of minutes they bore, pearlescent dawn pinks, golden midsummer glares, cool glimmers of twilight blues. Each hour lamb was a moment in the world above, carried gently across the valley so that time could flow, measured and merciful. "Careful now," Irwin murmured, her voice a lullaby in motion. "Step soft, do heavy ground today." The lambs obeyed. They always did. Some pranced with the glee of festivals, their hooves scattering memories of music and spice. Others trudged, heavy with the grief of passing hands or the silence after parting words. Irwin kept them close, her staff's bells singing the pace. No rushing. Not here. A wind stirred. Not fast. Nothing was fast, but purposeful. It parted the mist just enough to reveal the edge of the loaming shelf, where a lone lamb stood motionless, facing east. Its fleece shimmered with bright citron and spring grass green, colors of giggles and dandelion crowns. But something was wrong. The glow flickered, halted, repeated. A loop. Irwin's breath caught. "Oh, little one," she said softly. She walked toward it, boots brushing moss, her shadow moving ahead like an old friend. "What are you caught in?" As she neared, the sound became clear and beautiful. A child's laugh. Pure, effervescent, rising like a skipping stone on a sunlit pond. It rang out once, twice, then once again, exactly the same. The same pitch, the same breathless joy. Again. The lamb trembled. Irwin knelt beside it, resting a hand on its wool. Warm. Too warm. Like a sunbeam that refused to pass. "Frozen joy," she whispered. A moment loved too hard to let go. She looked into the lamb's eyes, reflections swirling in their depth. She saw a garden, sunlight dripping through wind chimes, a little boy tumbling backward with a laugh as a bubble burst on his nose. She saw the hands of his mother reaching toward him. She saw a father smiling, caught mid-clap. The world above had tried to hold the moment, and in holding too tight, it had knotted the thread of time. Irwin breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth. Slow. Grounded. She whispered the rite of unlooping, not a chant, but a story. A story told slowly enough that the loop could listen. Once, in a field of bellflowers, she began, voice as round as river stones, there was a child who heard the world's heartbeat. It laughed when he laughed. It paused when he paused. And so the child learned each giggle shapes the sky, each breath teaches the earth to wait. She spoke as though to the mist itself, letting the tale settle around the lamb's trembling form. Her fingers moved gently through its wool, untangling threads not with force but patience, drawing out what had twisted and turned in on itself. The laughter faltered. Changed. The loop wavered. A breeze lifted her shawl. The bells on her staff sang a different note. The lamb exhaled. The laugh rang out one final time, whole, unfrozen, and then passed like a ripple on still water. The lamb blinked. Its fleece shifted, no longer citron, but soft amber with flecks of sage. The color of memory no longer clenched. Irwin smiled. There you are. The lamb nuzzled her palm. She rose slowly, knees cracking like old doors, and turned back toward the flock. More lambs waited, each a beat in someone's life, entrusted to her keeping. The slow bells called again, and the valley exhaled. As she led the hour lamb back to the path, the mist behind them closed once more. But faintly, just faintly, the last echo of laughter lingered, not trapped, not stuck, but folded into the hush of presence. A reminder. A gift. And the world above ticked forward. The path wound through the hollows and knuckles of the valley like a ribbon dropped by an absent-minded sky. Mother Irwin's hour lambs followed in a slow, steady file, each step matched to the bell music of her crook. Where her staff's notes turned warm and coppery, the valley brightened. Where they softened into pewter hushes, the hills grew quiet again. The hour just returned from the loop, now nicknamed Echo, walked close to her heel. Its wool still held the faint warmth of laughter, though it now pulsed gently, like the rhythm of a remembered dream. "That's better," Irwin said to it, not expecting a reply. "Moments aren't meant to be trapped, little one. Even joy needs to go walking." Echo let out a breath like a sigh, and the others pressed around it, nudging and nuzzling in greeting. Our lambs didn't speak, but they remembered deep in their fleece, in their footfall. And this one would carry its lesson. Laughter is lovelier when it's allowed to leave. They approached the timefold gate. It was not a gate in the usual sense, no bars, no hinges, no latch, but rather an arch of wind-sculpted branches suspended in the mist. It shimmered like frost in moonlight, and where it met the ground, time bent. On one side, the hour lambs glowed like pages of an unwritten book. On the other, they would slip upward into the world, unnoticed, becoming the moments they carried. Irwin halted the flock with a soft whistle between her teeth. The hour lambs clustered around her ankles, fluff brushing against her skirts. She turned to face them all. Who's ready to be lived? She always asked. She liked giving the hours a choice, though time rarely refused its duty. The lambs stirred. One, wrapped in velvet hues of candlelight and ripe pears, stepped forward. An evening supper, Irwin guessed aloud. A good one, I hope. She reached out and touched its brow. Be kind, little hour. Let them taste the love in the bread. With a bow of her head, she guided it through the gate. The lamb shimmered and vanished. Gone to its moment. Another followed. And another. A lamb glowing with the palest rose, as though it held the hush of a new lover's breath. One heavy with sorrow, its fleece the color of graveyard moss. Irwin bowed to that one, too. They'll cry, she said gently, but they'll remember. And remembrance is the gentlest kind of farewell. Or pass-through. The gate accepted them all, asking nothing, only folding the valley's careful pace into the world's constant rush. When they were gone, only Echo remained. The little lamb pawed at the soil. Irwin frowned. You're still unsure? Echo didn't move toward the gate. Its fleece shimmered with indecision, the pale olive of thoughtfulness, the pale gold of longing. A hum pulsed from its chest, not a laugh this time, but something quieter. A question. I see, Irwin said, and sat down cross-legged beside it. Her bones creaked, but the ground was soft. Sometimes after untangling, there's a pause. A silence between pages. Echo rested its chin on her knee. She stroked its neck, her fingers deft despite their age. Do you remember the boy? A flicker. Yes. He laughed because the world surprised him. A bubble right on his nose. Not planned. Not repeated. That's what made it precious. Echo's hum deepened like a note struck in a hollow harp. But if you linger, she said softly, you become something else. Not the moment, just the echo of it. The lamb shivered. It's all right, she added, curling her shawl around them both. Let's wait a little. Some hours need time before they're ready to be lived. And so they waited. Miscurled and shy and tender. The gate stood open. In the distant valley, more hour lambs stirred in the folds of time, waiting for her. But for now, Irwin and Echo simply sat, wrapped in shawl and silence, letting the moment be what it was. Not moving. Not rushing. Not yet. Only being. A presence so full it needed nothing else. The stillness wrapped around them like old wool, familiar, faintly scented with lavender and wood smoke, the kind of stillness that doesn't press but rests. Irwin let her eyes slip half-closed, her hands still moving through Echo's fleece. The lamb's glow pulsed slow and steady now, like a heartbeat settling into rest after a long climb. In her mind, Irwin wandered the threads of the moment they'd just untangled, past the child's laugh, through the mother's reaching hands, and farther still, into the gentle ache that followed. She knew that ache. It had weight, but no sharpness. It was the weight of sweetness departed. Of a morning that had ended beautifully, but ended all the same. The valley breathed. Far off, a bell rang, one of the distant time chimes set in the hills of Telling, where shepherds read the rhythm of the world through sound. One peal for a birth. Another, softer one, for an old hand finding another in forgiveness. The bells kept their own music, shaped not by hours but by meaning. Irwin's eyes opened. Echo had risen, its legs tucked under it, ears twitching toward the sound. Yes, she said, reading the moment in its posture. I think it's time, isn't it? The lamb stepped back, shook out its fleece. The hues had changed again, no longer holding on to the bright sugar rush of laughter, but softened to the calm citrus of recall, the buttery haze of fondness. It had moved past the loop. Now it simply was. Irwin rose too, brushing moss from her skirt. She took up her crook. Come then. The mist parted once more as they approached the timefold gate. Echo didn't tremble this time. It walked steady beside her, though it paused a breath away from the arch. She leaned close and whispered, let them hear you, little one. Not just the laugh, but the space after. Echo's ears flicked. Then it stepped forward. The shimmer took it not as a flash, but as a sigh. A long, contented one. And just like that, the moment was set free. Irwin watched the space where the lamb had been. A faint pressure lifted, like the valley exhaling. I hope they notice you, she murmured. Not everyone noticed their moments. Some moved too quickly. Others only realized them long after they passed. But once in a while, someone paused mid-step, mid-chew, mid-laugh, and felt it. The fullness of time's grace. The slow honey of now? She turned back toward the valley paths. More lambs waited. The next fold was the hollow of held breaths where anxious hours gathered, those tight minutes before confession or the suspended seconds before a leap. Beyond that, the knoll of lasts, the last dance, the last goodbye, the final stroke of a paintbrush. Each place needed her hand, her eye, her patience. But before she went on, Arwen reached into the inner pocket of her shawl and drew out her hour book. Bound in nightskin, inked with lullaby black, it held the moments she'd shepherded that never quite left her. She turned to a blank page. With a fingertip dipped in memory, she wrote, Echoe, a child's laugh caught in the honey thick now. Released gently without rush. A moment lived, then let go. Heard again as warmth in the bones of a quiet afternoon. She pressed her palm to the page. The ink shimmered once, then set. Then she closed the book, tucked it away, and stepped into the mist again. The valley did not sleep. It waited always. Not with impatience, but with readiness, like a cupped hand catching snowfall. And in that place where bells rang slowly and grass bowed beneath time's weight, the shepherd walked. Guiding, guarding, listening, and always never rushing. The hollow of held breaths lay eastward, where the mist grew denser, pressing in like the hush before a storm. The trees here were taller, their branches bowing with invisible weight, and their leaves moved with cautious deliberation as if the wind were holding its breath, too. Arwen moved with practiced quiet, bells on her crook muted beneath a wrap of linen. She didn't want to startle the hours gathered here. They were fragile things, so tightly wound they might fray at a whisper. The hour lambs of this hollow were easy to recognize. There will stood out in stiff tufts, static prickled and trembling, colored with pale grays, brittle silvers, and the watery hue of held tears. One near her hoofs shivered with the tension of an unopened letter. Another's fleece bore the greenish tint of a secret unspoken across too many years. They didn't bleed. They didn't move unless guided. Arwen crouched slowly, lowering herself onto her heels, her knees creaking a soft protest. All right, she whispered to them. I'm not here to hurry you. The trembling one lifted its head. Its eyes were wide, shadowed with something unspent. She reached out but did not touch, not yet. I see you've carried a moment too long, she said. Let's breathe then. Just once. She inhaled, slow, like morning fog over still water, and waited for the lamb to match her. It didn't at first, but then, tentatively, its ribs moved. A quivering intake, a twitch of release. There she smiled. No need to rush the next one either. The lambs will softened just slightly at the tips. The tension hadn't vanished, but it had loosened, a single thread unwinding from a knotted center. That was enough for now. In the hollow, Arwen didn't expect hours to pass through the gate quickly. This was a place of preparation, of unspooling the tightest seconds. She spent hours here, sometimes days, until the moments were ready to move again. She walked between the lambs, humming low. A melody without rhythm, only presence. Her voice drifted between the hour lambs like smoke. Some flicked their ears. Others shifted their hooves. One hour, curled tight in the nook of a root cluster, glimmered pale gold. Its body was tense, but its wool carried a sudden flash of lavender, unmistakable. Arwen's eyes softened. Ah, she said. You're a proposal, aren't you? The lamb blinked slowly. A hand held out. Breath caught. The weight between asking and hearing. She knelt beside it, pulling from her pouch a ribbon of woven time grass, a calming thread infused with grounding minutes. She draped it around the lamb's neck, and its quivering stilled by degrees. Someone is holding you, she whispered. So tightly. They're afraid to let you pass. The lamb's eyes shimmered. Not wet, our lambs didn't weep, but waited with a shimmer of longing. It's all right, Arwen said. You don't need to be an answer. Only a moment of courage. That's enough. The lamb pressed its forehead to her knee. And she stayed like that, silent, steady, until the moment had softened enough to be lived. Later, when the bells from the western rise announced the start of the 8th watch, she led 3 of the lambs toward the timefold gate. Not many. The rest would stay in the hollow, some for days, some for years in the world above. But these 3 were ready. The proposal. The unopened letter. The hesitant step toward a confession. Each passed through the gate with a softness that reminded her of snow landing on outstretched palms. Arwen watched until they were gone. Then she looked down. Another lamb had followed. It was small, barely more than a wisp. Its wool was translucent and its hooves left no prints. But its eyes were old. Older than the valley. They shimmered with the hue of remembering before memory. And around its neck hung a single thread, silver, thin, and unbroken. Arwen's breath caught. You, she whispered. She hadn't seen this lamb in decades. Maybe longer. The hour of her own choice, still unwoven. The time she had nearly left the valley behind. The hour she had once tucked deep into the folds of her shawl, too afraid to live it herself. It had come back, waiting. Still gentle. Still offering. Irwin reached for the thread. Her fingers hovered. And then, without pulling, without forcing, she smiled. Not yet, she said. The lamb didn't protest. It bowed its head and faded back into the mist. Moments could wait, and in the valley of slow hours, waiting was sacred. The next morning came not with light, but with a deepening of the mist, a hush that settled into every hollow of the valley as if the land itself were listening. Irwin stirred early, long before the 9th bell sang across the ridgeline. She rose from her moss bed beneath the leaning willow and drew her shawl close around her shoulders. Today felt heavier, though not with dread. With purpose. She lit a small flame at her finger's tip, an old rite older than her bones, and touched it to the morning incense. The smoke curled upward in spirals too slow for the eye to follow. She watched, waiting for the first stir of hooves beyond the veil. And then they came. The hour lambs of the knoll of lasts. They moved differently, no skips or frolics here. These lambs moved like lanterns carried through a waking dream. Their wool was rich, autumnal, ochre, maroon, the deep rust of farewells. Some carried glimmers of applause fading into silence. Others bore the scent of a final hug, the weight of footsteps never retraced. Irwin bowed her head as they passed her. These were not hours to be tended with talk or tunes. These needed witness. So she followed quietly as they climbed the knoll, their hooves pressing indents into the sodden grass, each step a letting go. At the peak stood the oldest hour. It had walked the valley since before Irwin had first picked up her staff, back when her hair was flame instead of frost. The hour's fleece was almost transparent now, spun through with star silver and midnight blue. It barely glowed at all, but it carried with it the hush of the very last breath of an old lullaby. Irwin stepped forward, heart steady. She met the hour's eyes, and they gazed back, not pleading, not afraid. Only ready. She reached for the braid she wore hidden beneath her shawl, a thin twist of her own hair, bound with a reed of memory. She unwound it slowly, whispering the name of the hour. Not its shape. Not its story. Its name. Serene. The hour bowed its head. It remembered. She guided it toward the gate. But as they reached the threshold, something changed. The mist shifted with a sudden breath of wind, and from the trees came a chime not made by her crook. A new sound, faint, high, like the ring of glass catching morning sun. Irwin turned sharply. A child stood at the edge of the path. No, not a child. A figment. A listener. The kind the valley rarely allowed. She narrowed her eyes. You shouldn't be here. The boy blinked. His face was familiar, unbearably so. She saw echoes of the laughing child from the looped hour, but older now, standing still, barefoot in the dew. I heard it, he said. His voice trembled, not with fear but wonder. The laugh. Mine. It was different this time. Softer. Like it wasn't just mine anymore. Irwin's grip on her crook tightened. No one hears the valley unless time permits, she said. And time is stingy with such things. The boy stepped closer. It let me through. I think because I stopped. He placed a hand on his chest. In the middle of a Tuesday. I was walking to school. I looked up. A bubble caught in a branch. It didn't pop. He looked at her with eyes that had noticed something once, long ago. I just watched it. Until it drifted down. Irwin's breath caught. The gate behind her pulsed faintly. A listener had paused. Not just in body, but in being. Very few did. You remember the hour, she said softly. The boy nodded. And I wanted to say thank you, he said. I think that laugh isn't gone. Irwin felt a warmth bloom behind her ribs. Not pride. Not joy. Presence. She looked back at Serene. The ancient hour waited still, silent and patient. And beside it, the boy took the lamb's side as if he belonged there. Perhaps he did. Perhaps Serene was not meant for the gate after all. Perhaps it was meant to be remembered. Lived again, not as repetition, but as return. Irwin lowered her staff. Then keep walking, she said. But slower now. The boy reached out and touched the hour lamb's wool. Serene shone once, like starlight cupped in gentle hands. Then, like mist in morning sun, both faded. Not vanished. Folded into the world. And somewhere, in a world just outside the valley's breath, a young man sat beneath a tree, eyes closed, listening to the echo of a laugh he no longer tried to trap. Letting it go. Letting it be. Irwin stood alone once more. The gate was quiet. The mist unchanged. But something in her had turned. A single thread, long held tight, unwound, no longer needed. She took her crook. Her bells sang. And she smiled. The valley still held hours. Still waited for presence. And she would keep walking. The days that followed moved like brushstrokes across a page not yet turned, quiet, deliberate, full of texture. Irwin passed through groves of slow-shadowed trees where time stirred like drowsy leaves and across ridges where minutes rippled in the grass. Her hour lambs followed, as always, in reverent hush. But something had changed. The memory of the listener boy, how he'd entered the valley unbidden, how he had seen, still settled warm in her chest. It had been a long time since anyone from the world above had walked its folds with awareness. And longer still since one had returned a moment without needing to possess it. Irwin did not speak of it to the lambs. She didn't need to. They felt it in the way her staff rang now with a note just shy of astonishment, and how the mists around her parted more willingly like curtains drawn open for morning. Then one morning, though morning in the valley meant only the softest brightening of mist from steel to silver, she found a new lamb. It was standing alone at the lip of the Skybridge bluff, its hooves not quite touching the moss. Its fleece was unlike any she'd seen. Not golden, not blue, not tinged with twilight or dream hue. It shimmered like smoke caught in amber, curling with fragments of every shade at once. She approached slowly. "You're new," she said softly, "but not young." The lamb turned its head. Its eyes were wide and quiet, but in them danced not one moment, but many, stacked together like layers of old paint. A mosaic of experience. Irwin knelt beside it and placed a hand to its flank. The sensation rushed through her like a slow storm. She saw a woman standing at a window, her hands curled around a cooling cup. A letter unopened in her lap. A song playing from another room. The memory of footsteps down the hall. It was an hour not yet lived, but longed for. A possible hour. A maybe. A choice that had waited and waited until it took shape. "You're becoming," she whispered. The lamb did not move. Time, it seemed, had sent her something rare. Not a moment that had been. Not even one trapped or looped. But a moment yearning to exist. A moment born of all that had come before, rising from the compost of past seconds. A moment born from longing and readiness. Irwin stood. "Well, we'll have to walk differently now." She didn't try to lead the lamb. Instead, she turned and began to walk a path she'd never taken before. One that hadn't existed until that hour arrived. Behind her, the becoming followed. They passed through regions unnamed, groves where raindrops paused before falling, hillocks where the air shimmered with held decisions, crossings where laughter and grief braided together like threads through lace. And as they walked, Irwin began to speak, not to the lamb, but to time itself. Stories. Not those she'd read from the hour book. Not even ones she had known. New ones. Possibilities. Hypotheticals. Wishes spoken so softly they sounded like truths. And the lamb listened. Each word added shimmer to its fleece. Each silence added weight to its hooves. Until, at last, they arrived at a glade untouched by footsteps or memory. Here, the grass grew in spirals. Here, the mist formed no veil, only breath. And in the center stood a mirror pool so still it reflected not what was, but what might be. Irwin stopped at the edge. The lamb stepped forward. It looked into the pool. Then it looked at her. And stepped in. There was no shimmer. No chime. Only a quiet inhalation as if the land had taken the deepest breath. And held it. Then, without ripple, the lamb was gone. Irwin stood long at the edge, her staff quiet, her breath shallow. Not every hour could be lived above. Some were meant to be planted. Moments that had not yet arrived. Moments waiting for someone, someday, to slow down and make space. And when that person paused long enough to wonder, the becoming would rise. Ready. She walked back slowly. Her shawl caught on a bramble of unspooled dusk, and she paused to untangle it, humming to herself. By the time she reached the heart of the valley, the lambs were already gathering again. New hours. Old hours. One fleece shimmered with the warmth of a final heartbeat. Another sparkled like the first sip of cold water after thirst. She smiled at them all, heartful. She would walk with them, as long as the valley held mist, as long as the bells chimed, as long as time needed a shepherd. And maybe, just maybe, someday, someone else would arrive, not because they were lost, but because they had paused. And that pause would be enough.